Thank you. Thanks, Caitlin. So like she said, my name's Travis Biggs. I grew up in Northern California in a little town, two little towns called Grass Valley and Nevada City. So if you're ever driving over the desert and you go over Donner Pass, it's off in the woods in the middle of nowhere. So like they said, they asked me to come talk about living with calmness and clarity during chaos and change, which I guess they asked me because they know me and they know that I've dealt with a little bit of stuff with firefighting and airport emergencies and things of that nature. So I was just going to tell you, my goal is to just talk to you guys a little bit, since you're in college, tell you about how my career path went. It didn't go the way I expected it to. Like most people that I meet, that tends to be pretty common. So I grew up in this little tiny town out in Northern California called Nevada City. It's right up the road. If you've ever read about the gold rush, it's right there where everybody discovered gold. Sutter's Mill, you've probably heard of Sutter's Mill. That's right down the street. An interesting tie to Utah, Sutter's Mill. There had been a battalion sent out from Utah that had gone out for the war, and they went into California, Southern California, and they ended up coming up, and most of the workers at Sutter's Mill were Utahns, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But anyway, up the hill from Nevada City is Donner Pass, which is named after the Donner Party. And as I was thinking about chaos and those kinds of things, I thought if you want a really good example of how not to deal with chaos, go study the Donner Party and find out what results they got out of their experiences that they had up there in the snow. One of my favorite books on chaos and getting through those types of things is called Endurance, and it's about Shackleton, a guy that was an explorer, and it was very similar to the Donner Party in that they were stuck out it was even more remote, and they were out in the snow and all that, and they lived for months and months and had a much better outcome than the Donner Party did. So that was an interesting contrast between those two. So California, I was raised out there, and you have to be a little bit crazy, I think, to love California and live there because of the political atmosphere. You've got wildfires every year that just are huge and are devastating. So there's lots of changes and things that go on in our lives that we have no control over. It reminds me of, if you ever go, I've been with friends and different people to addiction recovery meetings or AA meetings, and they have that saying where they say, help me to have the courage to change the things that I can and be okay with the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. So it's important that we realize there's certain things that are going to happen in our lives that we have no control over and we can't change it. So if you just lose it over things like that, that's not going to be helpful. We have to understand that there's certain things that we just have to be okay with. So my dad was a contractor, so I grew up around construction a lot. And one of the things I learned about dealing with chaos, I learned when I was younger, my dad and my brother and I we were building this really awesome house, and it was like 40 minutes from the hospital, which we'll come into the story here in a minute. But anyway, we were way out there, and it was awesome. And we were framing, so my brother's holding the 2x4s, and I've got the nail gun, and I'm hammering in the top plate. And so I'm standing here, my brother's right next to me holding the boards, and my dad's behind him. So I'm pounding away with this nail gun, and one of the nails, for whatever reason, I don't know if it hit a knot or it just blew out the corner of this piece of wood, goes shooting through my brother's hand and just about hits my dad. And so I start freaking out because I just shot my brother with a nail gun, and he's freaking out because his hand's bleeding. And so I yelled at my dad, I said, "Dad, I just shot Nate with the nail gun." And he keeps hammering like nothing happened. And then finally he looks up, and he's just as calm as day, and he just says, "Well, I guess we better take an early lunch." And that's all he said. And that, just him being calm, helped me to be calm and helped my brother to calm down. And then my brother ended up saving that nail, and he had it hanging off of his rearview mirror on his car for a couple years, which I thought was a little bit demented, but cool at the same time. So my brother's pretty cool. But anyway, that was the first time that I remember thinking, getting all worked up and thinking that things were going really, really badly, and it turned out it wasn't too big of a deal. And so it's important that we do that in our own lives, is that we need to stay calm. after I grew up, I barely got through high school. I took chemistry twice. I took algebra twice. I took Spanish twice. I didn't do very good. I loved school. It was super fun, and I thought it was great, but I didn't do really well with my grades. So after I graduated and my teacher told me I'd never learn Spanish, I ended up moving down to Chile in South America. And so I lived there for a couple years. And I ended up learning Spanish fairly well, which was great. And it was a good boost to my, self-worth. So as I was in Chile, there was also lots of things that were chaotic. I moved a lot. But as I was growing up, my dad was a contractor, like I say, and so we moved 15 times before I graduated high school. And so that was a thing that I couldn't change. I thought it was normal and it wasn't hard for me, but for all of you, there'll be things in your life that you won't like and you won't want to change, but it will. So we have to be able to adapt and see things the way that they are. So I'm in Chile. We had a couple earthquakes, and I remember thinking how amazing it was that these Chileans who have lots of earthquakes, it wasn't a huge deal to them like sometimes it is in other parts of the world. They were so used to it, I guess, and they had a plan. And so when it would happen, they knew what to do. They knew what they needed to do first and second and third, and it was pretty organized and it was pretty impressive. And from that, I took that we can do that in our lives. If we know certain things are coming, like when you're in school, you know you're going to have some tests, right? If you know that that's coming and you plan for those things, you can relieve a lot of your stress by saying, okay, when X happens, I'm going to do Y, or things like that. So when there's things that you know are going to be chaotic and crazy in your life, if you have a plan, it makes it a lot easier when that hits. It's the same like with my kids when I go over, okay, if you get offered drugs, what are you going to do? So if you have that already worked out in your mind, then when you get to it, it makes it a lot easier and it makes your life a lot smoother. Another thing that we had when I was in Chile was some pretty big storms. I lived in this really cool town called Cartagena, and we had some pretty big storms where the waves would come up and wash out parts of buildings and take people out into the ocean and really cool things like that. It was very exciting. But a couple of times we had a lot of people built their houses up on the rocks where it was pretty stable, and then you had a bunch of houses down on the sand. And when it would rain really hard, it would make these little rivers and it would go right through their living room sometimes. So we'd go out there and we'd help them bucket out the water or shovel sand back into their houses. But again, if you have a plan, then it works pretty good. The first major, besides my brother getting shot in his thumb and some things like that, another day I was in Chile and we were walking along the seashore and there was a park and we were just walking along and we find this kid laying on the side of the road and he'd had his foot cut off by this train. I thought he was taking a nap or something, but we got closer and he said, help me. So we run out into the street and we grab a taxi and we say, hey, this kid just had his foot cut off by this train. The hospital's right up there. Can we put him in your taxi so we can get him to the hospital? And the guy goes, I can't get blood in my car, and he drives off. So we had to change our plan at that point. So my buddy stayed with the boy. I ran down the street to where I knew there was a phone. There's this little I don't know what you call it. They sell cookies and stuff. So right by the park. So I run over there, and I realized I don't know what 911 is in Chile. I still don't. I guess I should have learned after this, but I didn't know what the emergency number was. So I just told the lady, I said, hey, this boy just had his foot cut off and we need to get him to the hospital. And she was very good at staying calm. She didn't even seem like she hardly cared. She just went, I tell those kids all the time they shouldn't be playing on the train. And I'm thinking, well, I'm very glad that you're calm about this, but sometimes, it's good to stay calm, but you need to get things done when you need to get things done, right? And so anyway, we ended up pulling over another guy with a pickup and we threw him in the back of the pickup, and he lost part of his leg, but he lived and it ended up pretty well. So another time I was on a bus from another town nearby called San Antonio, and it was getting dark and getting late, and we were getting on this little bus. And down there you stand up on the buses a lot, and you just squeeze in wherever you can make room. And so we're going from San Antonio to Cartagena, which is about 20 minutes, and it's a windy, bumpy road. And so we're all loaded on, and this guy gets on, and it was apparent that he'd been drinking, or he had some kind of altered level of consciousness. And he didn't have his shirt on. He had it wadded up like this. He was carrying his stuff like this. And he gets on the bus and sits in the back. And he was making a lot of people very uncomfortable, so people were moving from the back of the bus up towards the front. And as we're driving along, every time we hit a bump or made a turn, he started swearing and getting all upset, and he was getting pretty verbal, and people were getting really scared. So they were starting to actually pull the little cord to stop the bus driver, and they were all just getting off the bus. And so he comes up towards me, and he moves his shirt, and he had been stabbed right here. So he had blood and all sorts of fun stuff. So I could see why he was uncomfortable. And then everybody really started freaking out and getting off the bus. And I said, we need to get you to the hospital. And he said, no, I don't want to go to the hospital. I'll get in trouble. And I guess he'd been doing some kind of drug dealing or something. So we go and tell the bus driver. The bus driver had a pretty good plan in his head, I guess, because he drove straight to the police department. And we get off the bus. He locks the guy in the bus. And then the police all come out and surround it, and they had all their assault rifles. It was quite a thing. It was pretty neat. But the thing that impressed me was that you could tell that the police had their plan of attack, and they weren't. I mean, they were loud. They were talking loudly to the guy, but they weren't upset or rattled by the situation. And so that was another thing that reminded me of that we need to stay calm and have a plan. And if you have those, then things work out better. You can imagine how it would be to have a firefighter or a nurse or a doctor show up and them being all frazzled and freaked out. That wouldn't help you as a patient or your family. So they do a very good job of training and planning, and when I was a firefighter, you just know you're going to get a call that day, and you know it's probably going to be someone's going to be injured. You know there's going to probably be maybe a fire, so you know what to plan for. And I think in our own personal lives we should do the same. We know that there's going to be certain things that are going to happen in our lives, and if we train or practice and go over those things in our mind, then it makes it easier when we get to that point. One of the things that stuck out to me when I was in Chile as well was we were driving through Santiago, and I saw these firefighters standing, and they had their boots, and people were putting money in their boots. So I asked some of the locals what's going on, why are they doing that? And apparently in Santiago they're all volunteers, so they just rely on, for all their training and new hoses and new equipment, they rely on people donating to them. And I remember thinking, that is really cool. I want to do that. At some point I'm going to be a volunteer firefighter. And so later on I did, but that I think that came from that experience. So I got home, and I had always wanted to come to UVU. I came here when I was a sophomore. My cousins all lived in Orem, and they all talked about how great UVU was. So I was very excited to go to UVU. So I came out, went to UVU, and my plan, I thought I was going to be a dentist, because I know all these dentists, and I'm like, wow, they make really good money, and you can work 4 days a week, and that's what I want to do. So that was my plan for school. So thinking that I would magically get good grades now that I was old and mature, I show up at UVU, and I failed chemistry 2 or 3 times again, and so I was frustrated, and I was confused on what am I going to do and this kind of thing. So before I gave up on it, I went out and I thought, well, I should go try this out and see if it's something that I like or not. And so I went to Sacramento, where they would train us for free, and you didn't have to go to school and all that. And I said, well, I better find out if this is really something I'm interested in. I'm interested in making money, but anyway. So I went down there, and we had this little bus that we'd get on, and there was a hygienist and the bus driver and me, because now I spoke Spanish, even though my Spanish teacher told me I'd never learned Spanish. So we would go to like the real low-income schools, and we'd take these kids that didn't have any way of getting treatment. And so we'd just line up all these kids, and there was kids from Ukraine and Russia, and kids spoke Hmong and all sorts of places. And so they'd line up, and they'd get on the bus, and we'd put sealants on their teeth, and we'd do a checkup on them and tell them if they needed to go to the dentist and stuff like that. And I loved it. And I thought, this is great. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. So then I went to my brother-in-law, who's a dentist, and I said, I'm going to start working for you, and I'm going to go to school while I'm working and get all this experience and all this. And when I was in that normal office, I hated it. And I didn't want anything to do with it. And I thought, you couldn't pay me $1 million to do this. And so I learned, as I was doing all these different things, I learned, when I'm in a homeless shelter and we're putting on 2 pairs of gloves and all sorts of eye things because everybody's got all these diseases and all this, I loved it. But when I'm in a, normal dental office, I didn't like it. And so I had to learn. I was trying to figure out why is that? Why is it that I like here and I don't here? So as we go through our lives, especially when we're in college, I think it's really important that we pay attention to things that we like and things that we don't like, and then you can apply that to whatever you're studying. And so that came into play later in my life as I slowly worked my way into what I decided I like to do. So I decided dentistry wasn't for me because you can't just do things because it makes money if you hate it. And so so then I was just kind of like, what am I going to do now? Here I am, and I'm at school, and I don't know what I'm doing, and blah, blah, blah. So then I had a buddy that was going into law, and he had gone over to the aviation department and flown an airplane and gotten his pilot's license and said, that was really fun. And all my friends were like, I can see you being a pilot. You would love that. You'd be good at it. So that's another piece of advice. If you don't know what direction to go, talk to your family and friends and people that know you real well. And sometimes they have more insight on you than you do, which is kind of odd, but sometimes they do. So I decided to try that out. So I went over to the aviation department, and all of a sudden I got straight A's, and I loved going to school, and I loved what I was studying, and life was great. And I was going to be a pilot and all this. And then 9/11 happened. And 9/11 shut down all of the airlines for a couple of days, which is a huge deal in the aviation industry. I know, for us it's kind of like, oh, I can't go to my aunt's house for 2 days. For them, it's trillions of dollars. And all these pilots were getting laid off and losing their jobs. And I'm thinking, great, I want to be a pilot. And now everybody's getting fired. So that was a little bit stressful and chaotic in my life. So I had also been taking some business classes that I liked. And my parents had started doing flooring, like retail flooring. And in the summers, and when I wasn't going to school, I'd go back and I would install, and I'd learn a business, and I knew it pretty well. And it made really good money. And so I thought, well, I'll go take over this business because they wanted to go do nonprofit stuff around the world. So I went and I took over their business, and I thought, well, I'll fly on the side because I'll have money for it, and I'll do those 2 things. So I found that if you can keep your major goals to like 1 or 2, then you get things done. My problem is I'm interested in everything, so I'm always wanting to do like 500 things at once, and then I get overwhelmed, and then it gets chaotic. And so on that front, I would advise, if you're hopefully you're setting goals, and keep them to 1 or 2 achievable goals, and things will go better for you, and it'll keep your stress level down, is what I've learned. So I went home and did the business thing, was doing that. I did very well at it. I learned that I loved the customer service side of things. So I loved helping people get something that they liked and wanted, and I didn't mind going the extra mile and all that kind of thing. But I still felt like I wanted to do more than just do a business. So I thought it was a good time to do my goal of being a firefighter. So I went to the fire academy at night, ended up getting associates in fire technology or something. I already had one from UVU in, I don't know, some generic liberal arts or something. I don't even remember. So then I had 2 associates that I didn't know what I was going to do with. But I started volunteering as a firefighter. That's really where, if you want to learn what it feels like to have a lot of chaos and change and stress real fast, law enforcement, firefighting. So it's fun, but you just have to know that it's coming. So in firefighting, I learned real quick that you need to stay calm so that other people stay calm. I heard a guy the other day say, calm breeds calm and crazy breeds crazy, and it definitely does. You get people that start getting all upset and worked up, and everybody starts going crazy, and you can't have that. If you're trying to put out a fire and you got somebody on the line that's going nuts, or for whatever reason, it just doesn't help. And then you got to focus on helping them, and it's just not a good idea. So my first structure fire I went on was really exciting and fun, because you go through the academy and they teach you all this. But when you're in someone's actual house that's on fire, it's exciting, but it's kind of scary and all those things all at once. So the fire chief that was with me let me go in, because he knew I was excited about trying out this new stuff and all that. So we're sitting at the front door, and he's very calmly telling me, okay, remember what you learned. We're going to go in there. You're going to hit over here. You're going to look for this and all that. So from that, I learned sometimes it helps when you're having chaotic moments. If there's something you can do to delegate certain things to other people, that takes a lot of the stress off of you. So if you can delegate or get backup or get help, that's very helpful. As well as if you find yourself very, very anxious for a long period of time, you should probably go talk to somebody that knows something about that, because depression and anxiety and things like that are real things. It's normal to have moments of stress and stuff like that, but if it's an ongoing thing and you can't kind of get over things that normally you probably should, you should go find help. Or if somebody else is struggling with things for a long time, you should probably go talk to somebody about that kind of thing, and that can help as well. So I'm running this business, I'm doing this volunteer firefighting thing, and that's all fun and great. I'm still wanting to, I had all these things that I was trying to tie together, and I wanted to do something that I loved, and I felt like I was being more helpful than I was. I was still working on my pilot stuff on the side, and I went to a 2-day refresher test prep course in Sacramento, and I run into this guy, and his name is Kevin, and we start talking. Turns out he went to school out here, worked at the Provo Airport, and he said, what are you doing with this commercial instrument rating? What are you working towards? And I said, I don't know. I've got my contractor's license. I've run this business. I'm a firefighter. I like public relations, but I want to kind of use it all together, and I don't know kind of what to do with it. And he said, well, you should be a operations manager at an airport. And I said, what in the world is an operations manager? And he said, well, you got to you work with contractors, because they're building hangars all the time, and they like you to know what they're talking about when they talk to you. And you need to understand business, because people are renting planes and buying fuel, and you need to work with numbers a little bit. Anyway, so it was kind of all the things that I like. They have airport firefighters, and I thought about doing that, because it's called ARF. You guys have it here at UVU. It's aircraft rescue firefighters. So you specialize in, it's firefighters that hang out at the airport basically and wait for fires and put plane fires out. And a lot of times jets come in and they slam on their brakes and their tires catch on fire, and you don't want those fires to get big, because it'll get into the wings and explode the wings, and then you have real problems. So I had thought about that. I thought about air attack. California has a really good, best in the world air attack planes that drop fire retardant and stuff. You've probably seen them on TV and stuff. And one of those air bases was in Grass Valley, where I grew up. So I grew up seeing all these planes flying over my head, dropping fire retardant, and I thought that's a pretty cool job. But you have to have 2,000 hours of piloting experience. So I knew that wasn't going to be for a while. So anyway, so Kevin, this guy, he became like a mentor to me. And he said, well, if I was you, I would go back and get your master's in public administration. And I said, what in the world is public administration? And he said, well, it's basically like it's an MBA, but you focus more on nonprofits or government jobs instead of the free market. So I said, okay. So getting a mentor is a huge benefit. It can be a huge benefit. So if you have something that you're looking into that you don't really know if you want to do it or not, getting a mentor, somebody that is in that field that knows, can be a huge benefit, because they can help you learn if it's for you or not, type thing. And so anyway, so I decided to go get my master's. I applied to BYU, got into that master's program, came out. We were taking care of my wife's grandparents, and they had a big piece of property. And so we couldn't just move out to Utah. So for the first 6 months, I'd get up at 4 in the morning and I would drive to Salt Lake, go to 5 hours of class, and then I'd start driving home. And I'd sleep on the side of the road, and then I'd go home. And and it was really fun, and I loved it. And I learned that I like traveling, and I don't mind it at all. I used some of that. You read about calmness, and a lot of people theorize that calm music and stuff like that is beneficial, and I think that's probably true. I started learning about classical music, which I'd never learned about before. I'm not that well cultured. So that's another thing you can do if you feel overwhelmed. Some people, I know some people are into the yoga and breathing and all that stuff. So after about 6 months of commuting, we finally worked out and we moved to Heber. And the reason I moved to Heber is because I had started networking with I'd called a lot of the airports because I had switched my major from a professional pilot to airport management over these last couple of years, and I finished online through UVU. So I'd called around some of the local airports and I said, hey, I've got a degree in airport management, but I don't have any experience, and I'd like to. Can I come just volunteer a couple hours a week? So when I would drive out, when I was doing that commute, I'd go over to the airport and help them out and change light bulbs on the runway or whatever they wanted me to do. And after a few weeks, they said, hey, can we bring you on, permanently? Will you come more often and we'll pay you? And I said, sure, we'll do that. So then we moved out to Heber, and I started doing that. And then they switched airport managers, and they said, hey, can you stay on longer and teach this new, make sure you help this new guy get into things and that he has the help he needs. And then once he got in, he said, hey, can I give you a raise and will you stay longer? And I said, sure. Because this whole time I was thinking we were moving back to California and back to Grass Valley and all this stuff. And I was going to work for that guy, Kevin, that I'd met. He was the airport manager at the Truckee Tahoe Airport. So that was my plan. But we got out here and my wife and kids said, oh, no, our plan is we're going to stay right here in Heber. So we switched things up. More chaos and change in my life. But so anyway, so I got on and I became the assistant airport manager, and I love it. And because of all these other jobs, I had learned the things that I love are public relations, and I like being involved with the community. I'm weird. I like going to city meetings just to see what's going on. And so I started sitting in on a lot of the airport board meetings and the city council meetings, and I just started creating projects. So I called art students at the universities and I said, hey, we've got these really cool hangars, and they're just blank cinder block for hundreds of feet. It's 15 feet tall and 300 feet wide, and it's just like a big cool canvas. So why don't you guys come out and I'll get you paint, and you can paint me murals of the history of flight. So we've got a group coming from Logan. They're going to paint Icarus, and we're going to start with things like that, like legends about flight, and then we'll move to the Wright brothers and things like that. So anyway, I like doing things like that. So I put on we had a girls' day to play because my daughter's always complaining that the scouts get to do cool things, but she never gets to do anything. So we had a day where I found all the women firefighters and police, women that are in the police force, anything I could think of in the community or that were pilots. And so we put on this big girls' day to play at the airport, and it was really cool. And so we did that, and I don't know. I invite, I'll call the kids that are in auto mechanics at UVU. You guys have a little campus out at the Wasatch Center out there. So I called the high school kids and the UVU kids out there, and I said, hey, I know you guys do auto mechanics, but how would you like to learn about jet engines and things like that? So they came out and did they came out for a day and checked it all out and learned about different kind of careers that maybe they hadn't thought about before, that kind of thing. And then as I got into, so as I did the MPA program, which was really stressful for me because, like I said, I always did terrible in school until I got into aviation, and then I did all right, but I was still pretty hesitant on my abilities in the real world, I guess. So I was constantly stressed out about these guys are all smarter than me, and blah 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 blah. But I got through it. But the MPA program really was good for me because it taught me how much I love nonprofits. I like finding I like finding problems, and I like finding people that have solutions or means of helping and getting them together. So through all of these various experiences that I had, I always try to pay attention to what I like and what I don't like and why, and what stresses me out, and what, when I am stressed out, how do I feel? Like if you're paying attention and you know that something's stressing you out, you kind of start noticing you've got these cues. Your body has these cues, and your heart rate goes up, or you start having thoughts or whatever. An example would be a couple months ago, we had a jet come in, and I think the pilot hadn't flown that type of jet much, and he put too much pressure on his brakes, and he blew his tires out and just skidded down the runway. And so he's stuck out in the middle of this runway, and we've got all these planes flying around that are planning on landing. And if you run out of fuel in an airplane, it's really not a good thing. And you can't just go out and grab the airplane and move it real easy. So I am knowing that I'm the only one that sees this, and I'm the assistant airport manager, and it's my responsibility to do something about it. And that gets your heart going real quick, right? So I start noticing, okay, I'm starting to be really concerned. But I caught it. Luckily, I caught it, and I said, okay, you can do this. You've seen this before. And so anyway, we got they have a thing called a tug, which is a really heavy, weird little three-wheeler machine that grabs the front of planes and pulls them around, and it just drags them around. So called those guys, had them come over and do that. But anyway, so you just know that these things are going to happen, and if you can catch that, and if you know yourself and if you can realize that that you're starting to panic or whatever, if you catch yourself, you can talk yourself out of it, or you can realize. Once you realize that, then it calms you down, and you can get through things. In the fire academy, they had a great way of. So you get into the fire academy, and they basically tell you the first day, we want half of you to not graduate. So we're going to kick half of you out by the time we're done with this. And that gets you going too, because you're like, oh great, I spent all this time getting my EMT and getting ready for this, and half of these guys are probably better than me. And so anyway, that stresses you out. So then the way they weed you out is the first day they just push you through like crazy physical, just do push-ups and run around, and they don't really care. They're just doing it until somebody starts, passing out or something. So a bunch of people just said, they didn't show up the next day because they're like, I don't want to do that. Then they have a bunch of like written tests that are designed to stress you out, and people drop out from that. Then they get you, and you have, you got your mask, and they have these hoods that you put on, and they're there to keep your ears from burning off and things like that. So they have you put this hood that you have, this cloth hood, and you spin it around so it's in front of you so you can't see, and then you put your mask on so you can still pretty much breathe. And then they put you through this obstacle course, so it's like you're blind going, and it's supposed to be like a real fire. When you get into a fire that you can't see anything. In the movies there's a big bright flame and everybody can see it. In the real world, black smoke comes down to about here, and it's 1,000 degrees right here, and your helmet will melt if you sit up and crazy stuff. So they put you through this obstacle course to see if you can handle, if you're claustrophobic is basically what they want to know. So they put you through these tunnels. You can't see what you're doing. You're just kind of banging into walls, and like in your walls, you've got 2x4s, and in a fire you might crawl through a wall. So you got to be able to take your tank off. There's just a bunch of things they put you through, and some people I don't think realize how claustrophobic they are, and they just freak out and pull their mask off and fail the drill and get kicked out. But they train you to not. Right? You got to stay calm, and then you'll be crawling through, and they'll reach down and they'll turn the air off on your air, and so then you're like, you can't breathe, and you're freaking out, and you're trying, they train you how to get out of it, but if you freak out, you don't do that. But if you stay calm, then you go, okay, I'm not getting any air. Check here, is my regulator here? That's good. Follow your hose. Go back to your tank. Turn the air back on, right? But when you don't have air and you can't see and you think you're going to die, then you tend to freak out a little bit. So anyway, that was fun to learn that, to stay calm, and it's a real thing. Like if you can catch yourself and know yourself and calm yourself down, and then just do what you know you need to do and just follow the steps, and you'll get through it. The other thing I was thinking about is I've learned a lot of, I obviously didn't go into the medical field, but I've learned a lot of medical terms, unfortunately through difficult things in my life or people around me. And I've learned words like myelomeningocele spina bifida and supraventricular tachycardia and all these fancy medical terms that I wish I didn't know, but because I've gone through some things with my kids and my brother and different things, you're going to go through things. I don't know almost anybody that's lived very long that hasn't had to deal, if not with yourself, somebody you know is going to deal with health problems. You're probably going to deal with financial problems. It's just something, it's just life. That's the way it goes. And if we feel like we're being picked on or that it's unique to us, it's not. It's just life. So if you know that you're going to go through these things, again, if you make a plan and then stick to that plan when things go bad, then you'll be okay. The last thing I was going to talk about, just overall advice that I've learned for you guys that are in school. If you need to change your major, it's okay to change your major. I don't know how many of my friends have just said, well, I decided I was going to do this, so I'm going to do it. And they hate it, and they get terrible grades, but they just keep doing it because that's the plan, or I don't know why. I know I'm way on the other side of things, and I changed probably too easily, and I love everything, so it's not hard for me. But if you just pay attention to specifics, I mean, it sounds a little weird to say, it's like the Shakespeare thing, to thine own self be true and all that stuff. It's true. If you know yourself and you know what's normal in your life and not normal, and if you learn to really figure out what is it that I really like about this or really don't like about this, then it just helps you to navigate and figure out what it is maybe that you should be doing or that you would like to be doing. And I've just found that if I'm happy with what I'm doing and if I feel like I'm reaching my goals and going in the direction that I want to go, your stress levels just go way down. And also when you're in college, if you guys are like me, if you don't sleep enough or if you don't eat very well, I used to think that was ridiculous, but really, really like eating the right things and drinking water instead of, Red Bulls every day, what you take in, it really does affect how you react and how you deal with stress. And I didn't used to think that, but it's true. But most of you have gone a night where you get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and then you compare that to a day where you got, 7 or 8 hours of sleep. You're not going to be able to deal with stress and with life and with challenges the same way than you would if you were treating your body better. So, anyway, that I have found helps as well. That's all I have for you guys. So, are there any questions that you guys have for me about college or chaos or change or anything like that? It's okay if you don't. All right. Well, thanks, guys, for letting me come. Anything else you need, Kelly? No. Okay.